Now to the great salmon escape of 2025. It was October. Storm Amy battered Scotland. On the peaks, winds gusted to 100 miles per hour. Below, rivers flooded, trees toppled. And in Loch Linnhe, the salmon were waiting. When waves tore through the farm's sea pens, 75,000 sought freedom, fleeing into the open waters of Loch Linnhe. This was good for these salmon, but was it good for salmon-kind, or specifically for the wild salmon they then bred with? Cardiff University's Dr. William Perry, who studies the Atlantic salmon, explains why releases like these could have a lasting impact on our wild fish populations, and whether we should genetically engineer our food for the sake of the environment.
In 1971, Jacques Cousteau, the father of ocean conservation and co-inventor of scuba equipment, made the following prediction. We must plant the sea and herd its animals, using the ocean as farmers instead of hunters. And boy, did that come true. In 2022, for the first time in history, more fish and other aquatic organisms were reared in captivity than caught from the wild, in a process called aquaculture. That year, aquaculture produced more than 130 million tonnes of aquatic species. Is that a lot? Well, if you can imagine the weight of a fully loaded, double-decked Airbus A380, and now think of 230,000 of these, you're basically there. Unlike the handful of land animals that we farm, there are currently more than 700 species in aquaculture, which include fish, but also organisms like mussels, shrimps, and seaweed. Almost half of these species have few genetic differences with their wild relatives, meaning they aren't as well adapted to farming environments, hindering production and bottom lines. However, this isn't the case for all species. Take aquaculture's golden child, one of its most domesticated and valuable fish species, the Atlantic salmon. Bred for fast growth and delayed maturation since the 1970s, these farm fish are now considerably different from their wild relatives. This is good for business and filling plates, but it poses a particular problem when hundreds of thousands escape every year. For example, when Storm Amy battered the Scottish Highlands in October this year, it tore through a salmon farm's pens, releasing around 75,000 farm fish into Loch Linnhe. The scale of this single escape was extraordinary. Scotland's total returning wild population is estimated to be around 300,000, so in a single event, around a quarter of that number entered the wild. Compared to wild salmon, farmed escapees have reduced genetic diversity and traits which make them less likely to survive in the wild. But if farmed salmon are so poorly adapted to life in the wild, surely they'll just become seal food. Well, most do. But despite the odds, a fraction of these fish survive and interbreed with wild populations, bringing with them maladapted versions of genes that make these wild salmon populations less fit and able to deal with environmental change. In studies of some Scottish and Norwegian rivers, 10% or more of salmon caught are from farms, with the highest numbers found near intensive farming areas. And this comes at a crucial time, when wild Atlantic salmon populations are seeing declines across the North Atlantic as they face pressures such as climate change, habitat loss and pollution. In the UK, they are already classified as endangered. So, what is the solution? Can we breed our way out of this problem? Selective breeding or artificial selection has made the salmon industry profitable and productive. But this process, which changes a population's genetics by breeding only the most productive fish over many generations, is slow and inexact. And in the battle to prevent endangered wild salmon interbreeding with farmed salmon, we don't have any time to waste. The solution, I argue, lies with genetic modification. As well as achieving faster growth, genetic modification has been used to make salmon sterile, which would prevent interbreeding. You simply knock out the genes needed to make reproductive cells and sex steroids, a far more elegant solution than that implemented in Jurassic Park. If all farm fish were engineered in this way, it would prevent the genetic pollution caused by escapees and protect our natural ecosystems. But if you look how long it took the first genetically modified salmon to get to market, we could be in for a long wait. It took 2.5 decades of battling with regulatory systems to sell these fish to Canadian markets in 2017. The salmon in question gaining just one extra gene from another salmon species. Progress in Europe is even further behind the curve. The EU has some of the greatest restrictions on gene-edited food in the world, and it was only in 2023 that restrictions were slightly relaxed in England, though not for animals like salmon. As there is a push to domesticate more fish species to improve food security for a growing population, genetic modification could not only help make aquaculture more productive, it could also protect natural populations and their genetic diversity. However, as the story of the Atlantic salmon shows, this is an uphill battle, and future progress will rely on us rethinking our millennia-old approach to changing the genetics of what ends up on our plates.
That was Dr. William Perry from Cardiff University. Do you have any thoughts about using more genetic editing in UK food? Email us insidescience@bbc.co.uk. Now, Lizzie Gibney is here to talk about the rest of the week's journal news. Lizzie, have you got anything more exciting than salmon sex?
It's very hard to top. These are two studies, one in Nature and Science that I'm bringing you first.